Well, I have one quasi-factual information. I just checked with my colleague here. What do you think the difference between the cleaning lady and the president will be here? We are actually what do you call it? Foundation. So we're not actually for profit, strictly speaking. And we guess it's kind of 1 to 5, maybe 1 to 6 maximum. So we're not too far away because we have actually quite a strong normative climate in Norway for keeping the provosts and the top echelons a bit lower and for pushing up the wages from below. That being said, I have a question or a kind of a comment to explore. It seems to me that there are very many interesting parallels between what you are doing at the regional level and what the welfare state is doing at the state level here. And we're talking about small states. We're talking about 5 million, so we're kind of a region. Even Norway as a whole, it's a big region, but few people. And the interesting thing is that both levels are solidaristic at home and egoistic abroad. This is very interesting. So this is, a kind of a feature. Norway abroad is fighting for selling fish and petroleum and so on at market prices. One of the problems I wonder how you solve is the need of requisite variety within the cooperative system to make shifts as the industrial innovation goes on and you need to move into new sectors and make new alliances. We have a model in the Nordics called flexicurity, which is basically giving some kind of social security to people in order for them to be flexible on the labor market and then to be retrained. But you have to have a wide spectrum of alternatives to go into. So how do you see managing this diversity that you need to be creative in the modern world at the regional level? Is it possible? Or should you stay closer to the local consumption, the local economy, as you say, and maybe leave more to international companies to, or you will develop into international companies then based on the shareholder model?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are many issues that you mentioned. I think if I captured one of your ideas and how we deal with the diversity of cooperatives and sectors and how we innovate and adapt in each of the sectors, is that one of the issues? Well, it's true that we have been, I think, quite successful in the establishment of an innovation model which adapts to the necessities of each one of the sectors. Originally, we probably had an idea that we could centralize that innovation platform at corporate level, but we have seen that we have been able to create an ecosystem of network of these micro models of innovation where each one of the sectors of the cooperatives will establish an environment where the research center, the university, and the proper business will respond to the particular needs of that. Okay. In terms of training and relocation, it's true that and that's one of the ideas that I also mentioned towards the future of flexible businesses, is the fact that probably we are not agile and flexible enough to respond to the rapid changes in the business market. Okay. And in order to do that, we need to rethink about training. We have, in fact, one of the problems that we had is that we don't have enough instruments and mechanisms to rapidly train people from one sector to other sector where we need to relocate rapidly. Probably we are seeing movements of relocation which have been unprecedented in the past in Mondragon. We have like 1,000 cooperative members in relocation at this moment, and this is just something which is not just related to the economic crisis. It's something which is intrinsic to the dynamics of the economy, and obviously we don't have the mechanisms to rapidly train these people. And the logics of local towards international, it's clear that the cooperatives, well, it also depends on the sector. We have the banking sector and distribution sector. We have one of the biggest distribution market cooperative, Eroski, in Spain, and that applies to a local demand. But we have industrial co-ops which nowadays have 70% of their activity, economic activities outside Mondragon.
Outside Mondragon. And under capitalist
dynamics. And under capitalist dynamics. So that's the reality of Mondragon.
Yeah, I'd like to maybe ask Per Ingvar for his comments first, and then Stein, and then we get back to a discussion again, because I'm sure that there would be. Also, I am very happy to introduce the colleagues of John Altuna, who are actually consist of 2 deans and 2 coordinators, right?
No, one dean and two coordinators.
Okay, so 1 dean is 2 coordinators.
And he's also professor on economics, so he can just.
So if you have any footnotes or any additions to what John said, you're very much welcome to also to raise your hand. Per Ingvar.
Is this on?
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the presentation of a so large, quite diverse case. I think we need to sort of figure out what we want to discuss, because it raises a lot of different discussions at very different levels. So all from this very sort of idea about cooperative economies, what that is in this case, or in our case in Norway. And then about the idea of corporations as organizations, ownership control issues, which are on the financing side, and the bottom and the top. And there are a number of issues that are critical to cooperatives, and to sort of understand what this ownership is and how it differs from capitalist or capital ownership. So there are many of those I'd like to ask you about, particularly these challenges around ownership and control. I think are critical, and it's attached to the idea of the financing side, over time as it grows, and this transformation when you go global, that it tends to change from local cooperative logics to global competitive, capital-based logic. So this is sort of just my so in a way you have to decide what we want to discuss, I think, because there are many.
It's very much, I think, since this is a jamboree, right? So I don't want to steer the discussion too much into one particular channel or topic, because the Mondragon phenomenon is actually a cluster of various topics. What is the culture like? What is the economy like? What is the ownership like? And you might have different questions to our delegates, and that's why let's keep.
I have a question then.
All right.
Now, how is ownership defined in this case? Because usually all kind of owned corporations are corporations. Also, capital ownerships are ownerships of lenders. So you could say any kind of company which is not owned by a single person or which is not self-owned is some sort of corporation. Now, if you're not capital owned, you are usually defined by some variable. You're a customer, or you're a supplier of something, or that defines so that you can have some votes of writing and some way of distributing the gains. Now, how is ownership defined in your case?
Well, one of the distinctive features about Mondragon, and we didn't say, is that we all adopt the form of worker-owned cooperatives. So what defines to be owner in Mondragon is to be worker in the cooperative.
Second question then, because you're a worker and you're part of one of the companies. Now, this is obviously a federative structure then. where you
confederative.
are in a way that you are a member in your company,
Yeah.
and then the company. So there's a cooperation of businesses at the second level.
Yeah.
And then there is something around the industries. So there's a third
Division,
level.
yeah.
And then there is the financial top level.
Yeah.
So you have a 4-level system where ownership differs from stage to stage, right?
Yeah. But it's a
Just to make
inverted
it clear.
hierarchical model where the sovereignty and each one of the primary cooperatives is independent and autonomous, and the sovereignty of decisions lie in the assemblies of each one of the cooperatives. All right.
So it's a cooperative or cooperatives of cooperatives.
It's a cooperative
which
of
in the end
cooperatives,
is a
but it's true that
4-level cooperative.
cooperatives at the same sector are grouped in divisions.
Okay.
Divisions have their own governing boards, which are represented by members of the governing boards of co-ops. And then we have the general presidency of Mondragon. But the rules and the levels of decision are very clear where they are reached. But most of the decisions lie on...
I come back to the challenges
All
for
right.
this one. First clarification.
So it's like Russian dolls. You open the door, another cooperative. Open the door, another cooperative.
I can tell you the example of the university, and this is very, very unique. The university has 4 faculties: engineering, business, education, and gastronomy as well. 3 of them are cooperatives, the original cooperatives. The dean of the faculty of business is the CEO of the co-op. Okay, and then we have Mondragon University, which is a second-degree cooperative. With 6 cooperative members: the president, myself, general secretary, and 3 other colleagues, cooperative members. We have an apex structure. The power and decision of the university might think that it's on the president, on the rector, or the vice rector, and it's no longer that. It's on the dean and the CEOs of the cooperatives, and everything is distributed. So the apex structures and the second-degree cooperatives are service cooperatives to primary cooperatives. Okay, and we are elected by the primary cooperatives, and we have that rule very clear, even at the presidency of Mondragon.
It's complicated, but it's...
But you also need to have the legitimacy as well. The president of Mondragon has previously been one of the presidents of one of the most strong machine tool cooperatives in Mondragon. Okay, and he has the legitimacy to do that.
Great, done.
Thank you. That's one of the challenges. I think that one of the essentials of the Norwegian success on the labor part of view is that members from the trade unions are also member of the boards. As an example, to understand my position, I was a member of the board of Orkla. It's a big Norwegian corporation for 10 years. And I think it was essential that we as elected from the employees also took part in strategical discussions of the company. We won sometimes, we lost other times, but it was very important to the motivation of the employees that they knew our positions and why we were in favor of some changes and against other. And it was also very important that we could take the fight about what we lost, to say like that. And that is one of the... I just also want to add to your information that I'm on the left side of the labor movement. I'm now a member of the municipality board in Bærum for the Red Party. So to clarify my position, because I think that one of the challenges to the cooperative movement is how you regard trade unions, because you had a strike in Norway in the Orania company for 2 months. That was partly a result of that you say to the employees that they should not be member of trade unions, or a discussion about that. And I talked to the leader of the National Trade Union of elevator workers afterwards, and I said that after the strike, after that they had an agreement, it has been much better, and it's normally better than in the other elevator companies. And I think that's a very useful experiment, because I think there will be challenges between management and employees also in socialist economics. One of the reasons of the defeat of the experiment towards social economics in the world is that they have tried to put that contradiction between management and trade unions aside. You have to respect that the problem. You see the same problem in the municipality organizations in Norway. You have to have trade unions opposing and cooperating at the same time with the management of the big municipalities, and that is the same thing in, as an example, Orkla, that was tried to build a very value-based company on shareholders, but to have money to the shareholders. But it was an advantage when you build that you had a range of salary from 1 to 4 when I began there for 30 years ago. Now it's 1 to 20. And it's a problem to the engagement of the employees that the differences are being so big now, and much bigger than they were before. Quite a lot of other problems also that I shall not use time in here. So the question is how to have this cooperation from the employees, because as you are saying, there are several levels of cooperation and several levels of organization. That is the challenge. Even in Norway, I hear that those that works in the elevator company says that 15,000 euros to be a part of the cooperation is much money, even when the salaries in Norway probably is closer to your salary than to those who do the cleaning work. So to understand the trade unions' successes on their best, I think it's very important to develop the cooperative movement.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Right. So there are like different elements, and it's true that we see like a conflict between or how the cooperative movement and the union movement have coexisted. Probably if we go back to history of under the original development of the cooperatives, and probably Lander can tell us about that, is that when the cooperatives were under the dictatorship in Spain, there was one single cooperative, which was Franco's cooperative, right? Union, not cooperative. There was just one union. It was the state union. And, it was the dictator's union. So somehow cooperatives were like put a barrier to the unions, okay? And they didn't see the unions as elements to empower the self-emancipation of individuals in the co-ops. We have also established, Mondragon has also established governing structures that somehow, I think, play the same role as unions in the capitalist companies. We have the governing boards, where members are elected democratically, directly, but it's a representative model. But we also have the social board. The social board where the same members are also participating in decisions. The social board is a consultation board to the management and to the governing board. So any issues related to working conditions, labor conditions, or even the well-being of the cooperatives are discussed in the social boards. It's true that cooperatives where they have weak social boards, you probably have much more distance between owner members and managers and governing boards. Cooperatives where you have strong social boards, decisions are much more taken much more in consideration. And it's true that unions also participate in governing boards, but if the company breaks, we lose all our capital assets, and that's the main difference. And the members representing the social board sometimes need to take decisions like lowering their salaries 10%, which has been one of the first decisions that were taken back in the last economic crisis. Another example on how unions and co-ops can also have a much more balanced, and I think there is a lot to be acknowledged and learn from each other. Those are experiences like in the reconversion of some capitalist companies in some regions in Spain, where the same the unions that were operating in those companies finally acknowledged that it was beneficial for the future of the company to reconvert into cooperative, and the union decided to dismantle the union at that point. Okay.
Thank you very much. Now, it's the audience time now. There'll be questions and comments, and there's already one hand up, and please don't be shy. Any questions? Before, actually, if I can ask you one question, a very short one, because I'm a cultural historian, and when I was visiting Mondragon, the Mondragonians were obsessively talking about, this is our culture, these are our values. If you're not a Mondragonian, if you don't share our cultures, you have nothing to do here. So this is what was very interesting, actually, because culture was so important for the people I talked to. So I'm just wondering about your Department of Education. Are you sort of programming there the ideal Mondragonians, brainwashing them into this altruism
Not at all.
Sorry.
I think from the for us, the only Mondragonian is Alex.
Okay.
And I had no single instruction in my whole life as a student at the Mondragon University. We do a lot of effort when you first start working with a co-op. The cooperative makes a lot of effort in cooperative training.
Yeah. So cooperative training.
Cooperative training is key. Is key for employees, but also for recent members.
Very good. First question there on the right, and then on the left, and lots of questions. Wonderful. Please
introduce themselves.
Please introduce yourself.
Karen Sund, Sund Energy and Viken Fylkeskommun. I must admit I'm a capitalist, but I'm very curious and interested in finding other models. What I am frequently told is that employees owning their own company is fantastic, and that's in both models. But what I frequently experience is that they don't want the risk of ownership. What I see, even if I work in public sector, we are trying to encourage business, whatever ownership, to be more sustainable, especially on climate. I find that many businesses, maybe even most of the capitalist ones, are ahead. You mentioned sustainability on one slide, no details. But the theory I've been told is that once you get the employers involved, and once you have a society that cares about each other, they will be far ahead of the horrible capitalists. So maybe you can say 2 words about what you do on sustainability and climate and beyond, the money model.
Well, as I said, it's the first time that sustainability has been drawn as a line of work. Okay, and I think one of the criticisms about Mondragon is that it's perturbating the cooperative principles and ideas. And one of the issues is that we are also being challenged, and Nina knows that from some cooperative sectors, I've seen they see Mondragon as a capitalist model rather than a pure cooperative model. So we need to live with all these issues. On terms of sustainability, I must be honest that sustainability has not been deliberately in the agenda of the cooperatives until now. Okay. We also need to be honest that we are not, as you see in sectors which are too far away from the concepts of sustainability, and we are like home appliances, construction, let's say. We have some cooperatives operating in the petrol sector, building bulbs for gas and petrol and oil as well. But most of the businesses are operating in sectors which are let's say, sustainable sectors. But again, some cooperatives have made that way forward, but it has also been in a way that they have been provoked to do that by their clients, by their providers, and those have been the rules that have imposed cooperatives to sustainability. But now I think there is a broader perspective of cooperative, and that's from the discussions that we are now having, is that sustainability might be an opportunity as well for the development of new businesses. And that's, I think, the new challenge.
Very good, John. Imre?
I think you mentioned a lot of incredibly interesting points, especially on the academic aspect of it. But I'm wondering, to what extent is the satisfaction of the members monitored, and what are like the more motivational drivers for the structures you've explained to us? Because I imagine, of course, that one of the drivers could be that you're supporting a system that is different and finds alternative way of building corporations, but also how is the societal aspect? Like, is there a focus on the social atmosphere, the emotional well-being of the people?
Yeah, I didn't mention that, but that's we talked about reporting data to Mondragon or whatever. Due to and in particular after, I would think that it was in the beginning of this century, there was a sense that the Mondragon cooperatives were like abandoning their values and principles. So there was the mandate prior to the one that I presented wanted to reinforce the values. So there was a huge project where the university was involved to retrain on cooperative values to all the cooperative members, where we are talking about thousands of people, okay, in social boards, governing boards, executive boards, and so on. What we now have established is a kind of observatory. We have identified key cultural elements in the cooperative values which need to be monitored. So every 2 years, every cooperative member in each cooperative goes onto this questioning, and there is a reporting on the results of the cooperative values of that to that cooperative and to Mondragon on total, to see whether there are some shifts in culture on one sector, but not just in order to monitor that and see how values are seen, but we also have crossed these values with potential levers for development, and we see that there are some cultural elements, for instance, that are key for innovation, and we monitor them. So in sectors where highly innovative sectors, we also monitor them and put in action some activities just to increase that those culture.
John, Imre asked about well-being and satisfaction. So well-being, a sense of purpose in life. How do you measure that? Do you measure that?
Do you have any example on that question of culture incorporates some elements of well-being and satisfaction?
Okay, very good.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Every 2 years, at least, there is and also on the governing and on the executive part and on the governing part. So.
Very good. Let me take the right wing first, and then the left wing. That is always superior, of course. Left wing questions. Okay, so the right wing gentleman here. Could you introduce yourself?
Should we use the microphone?
Maybe. Yes. Please. Yes, you're far, so maybe.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's wonderful to have you here in Norway. I'm British, but I'm very glad that there are people from the Basque Country who've come to visit. My name is Christian Victor Palmer, and I'm an architect. And for my diploma, the 6 months you spend at the end of your training, I spent 6 months drawing a new headquarters for Mondragon.
All right.
An anti-headquarters, because it's headquarters unlike any other kind of organisation of its size. Okay, so that's who I am. Today I work in a normal architecture office, but I have some drawings about Mondragon, and maybe at the end, if you would like to, you could perhaps come in and see some of the drawings where I tried to draw a system which is very difficult to understand, but perhaps has a lot of meaning for us generally. If it's possible, I'd like to maybe try and answer the question that keeps coming back about growth, and then I'd like to pose a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
okay. So there seems to be a concern about not growing quickly enough. And being slow. And architecture is also very slow because it takes a lot of money and a lot of investment to build something, and we can't respond very fast to the market. But it occurs to me that, especially in relation to the forming of Mondragon, which was in 1956, it took 15 years for the priest who came to the small town or the village to create an understanding in just 5 individuals that they could do something. And at that point in time, it wasn't just teaching them and giving them a future. They'd also gone and worked in business and realised that if they were going to work for a typical capital owner of a business, that they were not going to prosper. And they could understand that perhaps through living after the Spanish Civil War and all of the problems that had happened with the desecration of industry, that perhaps they did need to do something. And perhaps when you go to another country, and you're not perhaps going to countries which have been destroyed through war, there isn't a crisis. And perhaps like I'm not an economist, so I can't speak to crisis of capital, but at least in my understanding as an architect, convincing someone who already has quite a reasonable life to kind of do something quite radical and start a co-op is actually very difficult. And a 15-year perspective is what it took you plural in the past, your predecessors. And if you're looking to expand your business for so long, perhaps it might be worthwhile sending missionaries for 15 years to convince people beforehand. And I don't quite know whether that's realistic. The other thing that I wanted to mention was he was a priest, and I believe, but maybe you can correct me, that Catholic social teaching, which responded several generations previously to the crisis from the 19th century Industrial Revolution that Britain perhaps gave the world. This is what formed the ideas which responded to the problems in Mondragon. And so there was an enormous set of resources that have been applied to try and develop this. And then in addition, I think there was also another very important factor, which I don't know how to say the word, but I think it's autarky or autarky, which I think means a closed economy. Under Franco, perhaps you had a closed economy, so that there was a protection over your economy that enabled the very beginning of Mondragon to develop in a way that was very, very... I have to stop. Okay, but my question... I'm just saying, don't feel guilty. But I think these are factors that you have to consider. Now, my question is something about the difference between, if we try and understand the boundary of what is profit and non-profit, and perhaps we can extend that to clubs and the commons, which comes to your research perhaps about altruism and other things. I'm very interested in the fact that some of the co-ops are not profit-making, and therefore perhaps the workers, for example, primary school teachers, they might not share in profits. But then also perhaps banking, your bank that you have where you take loans out as a worker is also maybe, like education, seen as not part of the market. And you've positioned it within your model as a kind of service rather than someone to be served. And I wondered if you could speak to that, and then speak perhaps to, as a British person who was born in London, my generation are completely obsessed with housing speculation as a way of accruing wealth, and your model is very different to that. And so perhaps is there housing speculation in the Basque region and in Mondragon or not? So that's my question. Sorry.
All right.
There are 3 questions there.
Yeah, the first one was but I will start with the last one.
About the missionaries.
The missionaries. I thought it was more a statement rather than a question. But yeah, well, missionaries. It's true that they have been in the history. They have been the missionaries, and that was structural also. They were like individuals who were opening new markets, and so we have Mondragon has established some mechanisms for those missionaries to see and prospect and benchmark and to see opportunities to create. Sorry? Are you today a missionary? In some ways we are. Yeah, we are 14 people today here. Okay, some of them are in Oslo, others are in Horvik, back in the north. So yeah, I mean it's and you'll probably see a lot of people in Mondragon also benchmarking and seeing different opportunities. Housing, we do not have any housing cooperatives. There are some housing cooperatives in the Basque region, but there is a huge, and I agree that there is a huge speculation on housing in the Basque country. And Spain has been the main reasons for the economic downfall in Spain in the last crisis has been speculation, housing speculation. But it's true that Mondragon has not been established in the housing sector, for instance, nor the fishing sector, for instance. There are no fishing cooperatives. Mm-hmm.
Now, the last question from the right wing, and then you go to the left wing.
Yes, thank you.
Please.
So, thank you for your presentation. My name is Labus Nobronakis. I'm a researcher here at the NIBIO, that's the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy Research. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have two quick questions, but just before coming to you, a very, very quick comment from the previous question that I also really enjoyed about how the economists understand this concept of market, that we have the main doctrine of what the market is and what the economy is, but that does not necessarily mean that that's only one way to see it. Like in Holland, for example, we have the
Could
market
you please
economy.
speak up a bit?
We have the market economy and the human economy. So when you talk about the human economy, then you open up of all these different possibilities for alternative socioeconomic institutions like the Mondragon, so they're compatible with a more basic understanding of economics. But back to your presentation, what I understand is that Mondragon has a very, very complicated governance structure, right, on different levels. And my understanding is that even when you try to take a slice on this big, it's still quite complicated, especially if you understand that as a cooperative you need to have this approach of participation and inclusion and democratic control and all these things, right? So how can you balance this with the fact that you have to be agile and you have to be flexible and you have to adapt to changes in the market, the human market if you want, but also changes in the society, right? So you have this big structure. At some point you need to take some kind of strategic decisions. How all these moving things, the moving parts, they come together in an efficient way.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, it's true, and probably we are not the most agile, and we are dynamic, but we are not one of the most agile organizational structures. Okay, and that's something that we need to work on. But I think we have also found a right balance between democratic participation and also flexibility and being agile in decision taking. And that is to say that, for instance, the fact that we have a representative governing cooperative structure. That means that working members elect their representatives in the governing board, and they fully rely on the decisions that are taken by those representatives. Okay, decisions are not discussed. Cooperative members could discuss at one point the decisions which are taken by the governing board members. Okay, but you have your right to elect or not re-elect the member of the governing board. But once you elect the representatives, those members elected in the governing board have full responsibility of decisions that are taken. So I think in that sense, you have quite an agile way of decision taking, which does not consider all the time having to consult in the General Assembly every single decision which are taken. Obviously, if there is a decision that needs to be taken which is very, very relevant to the cooperative, the General Assembly of the cooperative, where there is just one member, one vote rule, can be called. But ordinarily, the General Assembly is called once per year. And very, very few times the General Assembly is called upon some relevant decision. So it's a kind of representative model. And when you see this very complex apex structure, I think, as I said, the primary decisions are taken in each cooperative. And that is very agile and dynamic. So we have like 100 co-ops taking decisions on their own. There are some decisions which are necessarily need to be taken jointly, right? But those are not many decisions, okay? And those decisions might take a long time. For instance, the discussions that we are having now with the mandate for the next Congress will take 1 year. And we are discussing those issues in each governing board of each cooperative until the next Congress.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, the lady in the back, and then yes.
Hello, my name is Janne Stena. I'm a political advisor for the Greens in the Parliament. And I really appreciate your presentation too, and I want to focus on this 1 to 6 salary difference, which is, I would say, a better track record from 1 to 3 up to 1 to 6, and the labor unions have achieved by being represented in the boards, going from 1 to 6 difference to 1 to 20. So the track record is quite good. But I have a question regarding, because that's within a company or within a corporation, and I would think there are bigger differences in between them. Like in Norway, we do have some worker-owned organizations which are lawyers. I don't think they necessarily look upon themselves as samvirkelag or cooperatives, but they have salaries that exceeds what any of us present in this room have, I would assume, many of them. And thus, is there any way of, do you have any system for distributing in between more highly profitable corporations to the ones who are have less?
We have the same level for all cooperatives.
For all cooperatives?
There's established rule. There's equivalent salary of Index 1, which is established by, we have a cooperative, a welfare cooperative, which is called Lagunaro. And Lagunaro monitors and establishes what is Index 1 salary for all co-ops, for the bank, for the primary school. So 1 is 1. It's the same, and the index is the same for all of them.
Okay. Here we have yes, Bernat, and then 2 or 3 more questions, I think. And that's,
I think I can speak loud if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay.
2 questions. One, the first, I guess this is an experiment in what we would call deliberative democracy in a way, according to what Habermas would probably call it. So my question is, how would you describe your sort of core values or principles for doing all the deliberation, or your cultural characteristics that makes this work? And what would be the main type of complications you have to make all this collective decision making? Second questions, not so far from you in Basque, I guess you have this a famous company in Norway, Ribera Salud, which is a kind of private-public partnership, and we also have global private-public partnerships, which are sometimes working very well, sometimes not so well. And so I would ask you, how would you describe the difference with what you are doing in your place and what they are doing with Ribera Salud, for example?
Well, I don't know if the professor of economics wants to. Yeah. I didn't quite understand the first question about.
What are the sort of the core values that makes democracy work in your concept?
The core values, as we saw, were the ones that we saw there, which are, those are the 10 principles, but the main ones are solidarity, participation, intercooperation. Okay. Those are the core values. I mean, that the Mondragon. The university has also some aggregate core values, like innovation, for instance. It's another of the values. But I think, in my opinion, participation and intercooperation and solidarity might be the most relevant core values in the experiment. Well, I don't know about Ribera's Salud, all right, but probably when we talk about public-private partnerships, we are seeing some hints from the public sector to the cooperative movement, acknowledging somehow some kind of partnerships. And I'll give you one example, which might be related to that. One of the recent new cooperatives which was established in Mondragon is GSR. It's a cooperative that manages elderly residences in the Basque region and now Spain. it's a very feminine cooperative, okay, and it's basically it's taking over. It's taking over a lot of church-related elderly residences. They are empowering and making workers of those residences as cooperative members, and they are establishing cooperatives in those residences. And that's a clear public-private partnerships. And in the region that we are now, I think the provincial governments is relying on this model, which goes beyond. We have nowadays, I don't know if Nina and Stein experienced that, but we have a conflict on the management of elderly residences in the Basque Country, and that's because of the conflict of whether that service should be publicly owned or privately owned. And this model might be somehow a middle term in order to overcome that.
And now is the time for the RNS students. Please, shoot with the questions.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm Juliana. I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Oslo. So I'm not so good in economy. So I perhaps have a different perspective, but I like this talk, and it's really interesting. The climate crisis is a human crisis, and as a philosopher, I think in terms of conceptual frameworks and stuff, and I think as a framework you can have, and it's been critiqued, that you have an individualistic view or you have materialistic values, and it seems as though the Mondragon values is not of that kind. So what I think, and perhaps I don't know if you have the answer, but we have concrete things as the Earth Overshoot Day, where we use up all that Mother Earth can provide in just 4 months, I think, in Norway. Do you think that Mondragon, the way you have your values, lead to more sustainable way of living, and that you see each other more in relation to each other than this individualistic framework?
Right, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, I think it's true that probably we have a much more collective thinking rather than individual thinking. But it's probably that we acknowledge that there is like one of our professors at one point characterized that the cooperatives experience like different eras, and the beginning was like the cooperativism of necessity, and that would like there were some dynamics in the early years of cooperatives that emerged and operated in Mondragon. But it's true that in the last 20-30 years we were experiencing like the cooperatives of well-being, okay, where all cooperative members were, let's say, had a very good living standard, okay, and that has also its downturn with some kind of losing values and losing track of our mission of social transformation, because the idea of the priest of Father Arritmentiarrieta was that the first element to transform the community, the individual and the community, was the company enterprise, but he had a longer vision. He had a longer vision to serve and transform society, okay, through work and cooperative enterprise, but he had other aspirations as well. And I think somehow cooperatives were losing track of that social transformation mission. That's why the last Congress clearly emerged on that. Climate change and what we are, I think we have lost track in some case of this global phenomena, and we have not been concerned enough to do that. So we are establishing regional networks, and I said one of the issues has been to group cooperatives in regions, and there are some platforms which are created. Mondragon is creating a platform in Mondragon to try to respond to the social challenges. One of them is climate, but another one that I also mentioned is demography. We have the oldest society in the world. And I think together with Japan, we have the lowest birth rate, and we'll probably have a huge problem of demography, and we need to face and challenge that. And we are going to organize to respond to that.
Maybe you should invite Juliana to
yes, please.
Cooperative in Mondragon. Yes, Adrian, please.
I'll try to speak as long as possible. My name is Alexander, and I'm part of the RNS.
You have to, Alessandro, you have to speak.
It's okay, like this.
Yeah.
So my name is Alexander Prodan. I'm part of the RNS program, and my question is also as a historian, I'm interested in social political movements, and therefore, to what extent are you interested to export a model of cooperative operation, cooperative organizations as the way you envision it in Mondragon? Because for me, I still think that we live in the Cold War paradigm of duality, of confrontation of ideologies. Therefore, I think that you would benefit to export your model, either it's in Spain, either it's in countries that don't have right now the climate for such co-ops to exist. And you would benefit, I think, by having common knowledge on assessing the crises and so on, in the context of economical crisis. Therefore, my question is, to what extent are you intend to assume such a challenge? And since you go bigger as a political movement, in some contexts, you will gain more critics, and therefore, would you assume such a direction?
Right. That's a very interesting and a good question. And in fact, we received over 2,000 visitors every year to Mondragon. Okay. One of the principles is universality of cooperative principles and of movements. And we are an open society.